Hi, so welcome to Fun with Maya. I'm Duncan Brinsmead. I'm a research scientist at Autodesk, working on the Maya product primarily. I've been with the company for years now. I go way back to early SIGGRAPHs, and probably a lot of you know me from a lot of the user groups I've done over the years. This is a bit of a change of pace in here. It's smaller, but I tell you, I got an hour and a half, which is just so luxurious. Last year, I think I had 10 minutes, and they knew I was going to go over, but it'll be nice not to have people with, doing this through the whole presentation and getting little notes and stuff. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the stuff I like to just play around with Maya. I like to help out users to solve problems in my spare time when I'm not working on development, and also just try out kind of crazy, wacky things, see if they work, see if they don't, and just in general play at the computer. And I found Maya has been really rewarding that way. You can really do a lot of fun and interesting things with it when you're not just trying to do the stuff you normally have to do. And I think that's probably like the essence of innovation too. Is just put people in a place where they can play around and try stuff and experiment and potentially turn some of that play into products. So I'm going to show you a few of the little simulations and things like that. I've been goofing around with Maya. I developed PaintFX originally, so I'm going to show a little bit of PaintFX stuff in this, and I've worked over the years on Maya fluids and also all the nucleus or end things like end particles and end cloth. So this talk will cover mostly those areas of Maya. So let me start out here. We'll shoot some arrows. So with end particles, now there's a stickiness parameter, and I'll fire a volley arrows here. And I've got some objects, and this is just using particle instancer on these arrows, and then the collisions with the objects. But then the stickiness parameter is kind of nice because it lets them kind of stick in the objects wherever they hit. So you can kind of pick an object that has some arrows in it, and I can move it around. Let's see. So we get the translation there. You should be able to move it around. Yes, there you go. Here's my translate now. So I can kind of move that there. This one, and if you move it, fire more arrows. Let's try adding some more objects. So this time I'll add some cloth. We've got a little end cloth there, and I've made it terrible. So you picked it and picked a few spots on it, make it terrible, just kind of constrained it to the pole there. Still quite simple. And again, I've got the stickiness on the particles so that when they hit, they'll kind of stick, and they'll also pierce through and hopefully rip the cloth there. Yeah, hopefully the second volley of arrows should be able to totally tear up the flag there. I don't have anything against France, and I don't even think I did the colors right there. I wasn't trying to do France. It's just the easiest way to do a texture on something is just use a little ramp. And my only other choice, I think, was like I could have done Japan, I suppose. A dot's pretty easy. So here's a use of end cloth to create a snake. So the basic simulation here, you can kind of see as it moves, I've got some objects it can crawl over, and it's this sort of a sidewinder kind of snake, the motion he's got. Let me just stop that and select this and continue on. Now I can move this up and kind of try and interact with him. He's got a goal that he's trying to achieve over here, so he's trying to move over to the left and be wherever this cube is. Now, go back to the beginning here. the way I set this up, you start with as simple a mesh as you can manage for your object, but the key to have it deform and have the cloth still compute on trying, like muscles, right, is you need to animate the base input mesh before you make it cloth. So you give it some animation. In this case, to animate it, I took a couple of sine deformers, one going up and down and one going sideways, and just animated the offset of the sine deformers to get like an undulation kind of sidewinder motion. And then made that object cloth. And then under the cloth mesh, under rest shape, you say connect input mesh to rest shape. And what that does is now, instead of just getting the rest shape of the cloth at the first frame, it gets it every frame. So if the rest shape is deforming, the stretch, bend, resistance, and stuff will try and achieve that rest state. And then once you have that, it's simple. You can just let it run. This a little bit warped the way it works, but you could instance another object and get it to work a little better. One of the things that's interesting about a snake, I found he had to do as well. You might not realize it at first. The slithering motion alone in friction does not make a snake move forward. It relies on a couple of things. One is that it's usually a little bit in a groove, like in a sand, right? And the nature of its belly and stuff is it has less friction in the forward direction than side to side. So it's able, like a skater moving, a snake is able to kind of dig in side to side and get friction that way, but it slides when it's going forward. And so it's this anisotropic friction. And I kind of realized that as I was working. And unfortunately, we don't have an anisotropic friction attribute, but a way of achieving that, sort of, is you can use the air drag to some degree. And the air drag is a bit anisotropic because it looks at the orientation of the surface with the air. So that helps you get a slithering snake move forward. So if I go in here in the dynamic properties, we can look at the air drag. And you see I've got quite a bit of drag there. So if I just turn off the drag, I think this thing, a sidewinder motion can still sort of move forward without the drag. It can kind of walk a little bit, but you're not getting the same forward motion. But as I bring up the drag here, he'll start to move, right? I mean, if you do too much drag, it's like a water snake. It'll go up and around and stuff. It won't just fall. But the drag is important for having it move in a particular direction. Another interesting creature, like a snake, is a worm. And worms, though, they move differently than a snake. It's a different kind of undulation. It's not side-to-side muscles, and worms don't have a backbone or anything like a snake. Instead, they've got these segments, and the segments contract. Here, I'll just run this. The segments contract, right? And they form little bulges. When they contract, it gets fatter, and then they shift out, right? Sort of a little bit like the way an inchworm works, right? It'll extend its body in places, and it kind of locks it down where it's fatter, and that's how it moves. But now again, I ran into problems with this simulation to do it. Initially, I got all this stuff working, but it didn't move forward. You can imagine, just if the friction is the same in all directions, where the parts that are sliding forward will cancel the parts that are sliding back, so it'll just sit there and undulate back and forth, right? What actually happens in a real worm, and I find this quite interesting, is when it contracts, not only does it bulge out, little hairs extend. So these little hairs extend from the segments, and they grab onto the dirt or whatever they're touching. So it gets selective friction in the bulgy places, and it's more slippery in the skinny parts. So to do that, well, first off, to do the worm itself, I did like a deformer on it, and just animated like a wire deform, just animated the offsets to get the scrunching up of the segments, right? And then use the same wrestling thing to get it. Now, to get the friction working, I knew the rate at which the waves were propagating across the worm body here for the contraction, so I created a matching animation on the friction. So if we go under collisions here and look under the collision property maps, you can see I've got a ramp texture on friction, and then this is just repeated, and the offset of the repeat is animated to match the positions on that, so these bulges have more friction than the sliding bits. And once I did that, it acted like those little hairs grabbing, and it then moved on a flat surface. Now, admittedly, another way of getting it to move, instead of just on a flat surface, would have been if it's going through stuff, right? The like dirt and stuff in the ground, where it's skinnier and wider, it actually pushes through the dirt. So that kind of undulating shape actually helps propel it, even without the added friction. But on a flat surface, you really need the kind of effect of those hairs in order to get it to move forward. So I did, so here's just some worms, and then drop a little bit of dirt on them. And then with the stickiness on the dirt, you can get that nice gooey, icky effect of the worms clad in the dirt as they try and move around through it. And the dirt actually can help the worms move a little bit too. This was another attempt this was an early attempt at kind of dropping some of these worms and having them push around a few particles, more like alien, intestinal things or something. Let's see. Okay, on to a different thing now. One user wanted to do a lathe being cut, and so I came up with this. This is just a little play blast of the simulation. Now, to do this, you really, the only practical way I found is you've got to model your object in a corkscrew. So you have to have a model of a cylinder that's actually in a spiral, so you can cut along the polys, right? And you do it with just a single poly, and then you extrude it after the simulation. So you're not trying to cut the extruded simulation of this poly, right? And then also added, so made that end cloth, added some breakable constraints, and then also used the resilience on the bend resilience on the simulation, which allows the metal to crumple, and then it retains the crumpled shapes, right? So which metals do, right? If you bend them past a certain point, they get the new point. So you've got an angle of restitution that you can set to allow that on the cloth. Okay, another thing a user was trying to do, and I hadn't realized how, I kind of thought that, the confetti would do this, but like, here's a confetti kind of twirling as it falls, and this is an interesting property of paper when it falls, and I've not yet seen a totally convincing explanation of why. I suspect it has something to do with different drag on the leading edge from the trailing edge, but so, if I take a piece of paper like this, right, and let's see if I can drop it high enough that people can see, but if I drop it, see it does this spinning like crazy. It's like a little rotating machine as it falls, right? Little paddle wheel. And it's just a simple piece of paper. I don't have any fins or anything. It's just flat. And when you drop it, it really spins like crazy. So I thought cloth with the drag model and stuff we've got on it should do that. Should get a little momentum and flip, but it doesn't do it at all. There are a couple of reasons why it might fight that, but more so it's, I think we're actually just not modeling this differential drag between leading and trailing edges of objects. So it's tricky to actually work around, because how do you get the cloth to spin as it falls? The solution I came up with was actually model these things as two poly pieces. So if we zoom in here, you see each of these is actually two polys, and then with the poly, each of those faces are rotated with each other. So the normals are facing opposite. So you've got two faces rotated with opposite facing normals, and then I do a merge to put it back in again into one object. So if we look at the editor now what we can do is the pressure in cloth gets applied along the surface normal of the object. So we now have a way of kind of blowing it and making it spin. So under the pressure setting here, I've got a little pressure. If I make the pressure 0, and I'll just rewind here, and we'll play the animation. You can see it's just falling in kind of a dull way. As I increase the pressure, I can make it spin, and a lot of pressure, you can spin faster. You can just dial up the amount of spin you want. So I thought that was kind of fun. Here's a little animation with just some glow and motion blur added on. The glow, actually, if you want to get a highlight to glow like that and sparkle, one way of doing it is you make the specular intensity quite high on your surface, and then just give it a little bit of shader glow, not too much, and then on the shader glow node, set the threshold of glow. So then only the color added into the glow buffer that exceeds a certain level will then glow, and so you can make highlights glow. There's also on some of the shaders, there's a specular glow that's separate. I think the ramp shader has a separate specular glow if you want to do it that way as well. Okay, now we can inflate and deflate objects. Actually, there's some interesting uses for the inflating cloth. You can actually use it to model shapes. So this was actually started out as a very simple shape, but then it became, somewhat more interesting shape that's constrained by how it can inflate and self-collision and things like that. So one could potentially, create a simpler object, make it cloth run a little bit to get certain shapes and models. There's some interesting use. We had a guy at my work did a paper on using Maya Nucleus for creating architectural, ideas and models and stuff. And there's a lot of interesting things one can do with that. Here's another use of the kind of the inflation and the pressure stuff. I thought it'd be fun to model the way the lungs work. And I used to play French horn, and so I learned about diaphragm, and diaphragm's not always obvious to people when they're using it and stuff. They think they breathe with their lungs and they inhale with their lungs, but it's one muscle that is resulting in. It's this muscle down here, and then what happens is that muscle contracts, right? And then it pulls the lungs down when it contracts, and thus sucking air. And I've got a little bag here on the mouth just to show that the air is going in. And I've got volume conservation on this object so that, as the volume goes down, this guy inflates, just to show the air kind of sucking in and out. So it's completely trying to do everything physically here as best I can. And then, but some of the things when I first set it up, I hadn't realized I'd need to do. One of them was that you've got to model the rigidity of the rib cage, because otherwise, when this pulls down on the lungs will just collapse like this bag, so it won't suck. So to do that, here I'll show the constraints here. I created some slide-on surface constraints. So we go in, you see here, as this moves, the constraints keep this distance fixed, but they allow the connection point to slide up along this rigid outer chest. So they're contained within it, and thus the only thing they can do is expand. They can't collapse as the diaphragm pulls down. And so then we have the complete model. I also had to make this it looks like multiple objects, but this part at the top has to be one object, because for the volume conservation, it'll really only work with if you've got one mesh that is working on. Another thing a user wanted to do